Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started in just a minute. Just let a few more people join us. In the meantime, if you're interested in taking political action with Now New York this year, whether that's phone banking for candidates that we endorse or virtual canvassing, then please consider becoming a Now member. If you sign up, you'll also get access to our voter guides and information about these volunteering opportunities. Now more than ever, we need you with us. So please consider joining. The links to join are on the screen right now, and they'll be posted in the chat room as well. And please feel free to introduce yourselves and let us know where you're calling in from. So we'll get started in just a few seconds. Okay, so we'll get started now. Thank you all so much for taking the time out of your days today to join us. We know these are difficult times, so we really appreciate you being here with us today. My name is Shannon Lowry, and on behalf of Now New York, welcome to our Activist Power Hour, running for office during COVID with Melissa Mark-Viverito. Before I hand over to Sonia Osorio, Now New York President, to introduce and welcome Melissa, I'll just run through a few housekeeping items with you all. So firstly, just a reminder that this is a Zoom webinar, which is a little different to the Zoom meetings that everyone's getting used to. So the controls might look a little different on your screens, but rest assured you're automatically on mute and your video is hidden. The most important thing is that you can see the speakers and the slideshows when they're on the screen. If you have a question during the presentation, then please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those after the presentation. If you want to use the chat room, we would love to know where you're joining us from, so please feel free to introduce yourselves. You can interact with other participants there, and we'll also be posting relevant links or useful links that we speak about throughout the presentation there. And this webinar is being recorded as well. So without further ado, I will hand over to Sonia Osorio, the Now New York President. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Sonia here. Good to see you again. Thank you for joining our weekly activist power hours. We miss seeing you in the office, but for now, this is what we're going to do, and it feels great to connect with you. I know we've got a lot of, every week we have new people on, so I'm going to go over a couple of things each time, and that is, first and foremost, that I want you to know that our phone lines are open if you need us. Our sister organization, Women's Justice Now, has a resource center that has a lot of the latest information that you need to access COVID-related benefits and services, and just about anything else that you may need. So please make sure to check that out at womensjusticenow.org. We are going to keep being here every Wednesday, noon, to have lunch with you, to talk about what we can do to harness our power as women, collectively. We're going to give you the tools, and we will end today's session with actions that you can take to move our country in the right direction. Boy, if there's ever been a time to be motivated, it's now. I thank you very much, as Shannon said, for spending your time with us here today. This is also important. I know we're all working towards similar goals, and we're here to do as much as we can to work with you to make those goals come true. We've got a lot happening right now in our society, and a lot that we can do in the coming weeks and months, culminating in the presidential election November 3rd, where we are going to grab Trump by the ballot, which is Now New York's campaign to do all that we can to change the direction of this country at the federal level. And with that, we are so thrilled that we have with us today someone who is a true leader, Melissa Mark-Viverito. She's running for Congress in the 15th district. And we're going to talk to her today about a little bit of what is it like running for office in the middle of a pandemic, and now a historic demonstrations for racial justice. She has been, I can tell you this, she has been a champion for racial justice. Her record demonstrates that. I've had the pleasure to work with her over many years, and you know, she is a true leader. I mean, in women's rights, LGBTQ rights, uplifting Black and Brown communities here in New York, criminal justice reform. We're going to hear about that today, about her ideas on helping us drive our country in the right direction. But I know her as a person who is steadfast to her values, who's tenacious, whose strength of character, time and again, has her do the right thing. And more than anything, you know, her ability to get things done. We need effectiveness more than ever, and we need real leaders like Melissa. So I'm so thrilled to have her today on our show, on our program, to hear how we can help advance her and her ideas on her district and what our country needs. So, Melissa, I would love to bring you on.
Oh, there we go. Hi, how are you, Sonia? Good to see you. And to all of those that are joining, thank you for joining today to this conversation. It has been mentioned, it's trying times for us, those of us that live here in New York, in the middle of a pandemic, and all the challenges that we've had. So thank everyone that's coming from all different parts to be part of this conversation.
Absolutely. What I didn't mention in the opening is that, you know, Melissa, I did mention her track record of success, but she is she's a trailblazer, and she has broken glass ceilings. I mean, she is the first Latina to hold citywide office. I mean, as Speaker of the City Council, she was the second most powerful person holding others accountable and moving progress forward here in New York City. So that is something that I should have mentioned off the bat for those of you who don't know her. But you know, I'd love to talk to you, Melissa, a little bit about how the campaigning is going now. I mean, you're not a newcomer to politics and to running campaigns. What's it like, and what's it like logistically, and having to change your strategy? And you know, it must be so different not being able to interact and see people's faces and shake their hands.
Right. I mean, it's a really difficult time because not only is New York City and New York State the epicenter of this pandemic. You know, we've lost over 20,000 people at this point in the city. And this district in the Bronx, the 15th Congressional District, has suffered the greatest losses with regards to per capita, right, deaths resulting from the pandemic. Those of us who have been fighters for equity and for justice our whole lives and professional careers, it is no surprise that when you deal with any type of crisis, whether it's economic, whether it is a healthcare crisis, it is communities of color and low-income communities that are disproportionately impacted. And so it is no surprise that in this district, in a low-income borough here in New York City, that we have seen this reality of how the pandemic has affected the constituents of this district. It also really speaks to one of the reasons, right? And one of the main reasons why I wanna be in this fight is because as a society, as a country, we have great disparity, racial injustice, racial inequities that are unsustainable. and that really reflect the work that we have to do. We cannot, having gone through COVID, having gone through the protests that we're going through right now, this clamoring for racial equality, we cannot go back to doing things the way that they were being done. If this has not made the case that we need a universal healthcare system in this country, nothing else will, right? If all of these people mobilizing in the streets and saying that law enforcement and the racial inequalities and injustice that exist within our governing structures, if we don't do something substantively to address that, we're not going to advance as a society. And so for me, we are really at this incredible juxtaposition and crossroads, and it really is about seizing this moment and having people go to Congress that are unapologetic about that, making people uncomfortable in these conversations and making change happen. So more specifically to this district, so we've seen, great numbers of hospitalization rates and people impacted by COVID. And so it has, we've been in lockdown here since early March. And so it has impacted the whole way that we're running a campaign. Prior to COVID, I was knocking on 1,000 doors a month, personally, not my campaign. I knocked on close to 5,000 doors by the time we went into lockdown. And so now I don't have the ability to do that. And so now a lot of it is communicating with voters by phone banking. So anybody who's listening who would love to join my phone banking and join as a volunteer in these last 2.5 weeks, then really it is something that is incredibly important right now. Our governor did put an executive order through to make it easier, so to speak, to get access to mail-in ballots. We still have a lot of hoops that we have to overcome in the state of New York. I think we're one of the worst states when it comes to voting access. And we just got early voting in the last election cycle that the state legislature changed hands from Republican to Democratic on the Senate side, so that we were able to advance some legislation that we had been asking for. But we don't have, we're not a vote by mail state by any means, like Colorado is, and maybe some other states are. So the concept of voting at home and voting by absentee is something that makes some voters nervous because they're not used to it, right? People are used to physically going, casting that ballot, seeing that ballot go into the machine. And that's something that as we're making calls to people, they're saying, I don't know about asking for the absentee ballot and voting from home, but they don't want to go to the ballot box itself because they're concerned about COVID. So it's a very complicated scenario. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. And obviously our lives have just been upended in many ways and the way we function on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and I didn't mention it before, but I'm sure there are many people on this call who we've heard from some who have participated in the peaceful demonstrations during this week. We would love to hear from you. We want to hear your stories. Melissa, one of the things that you certainly have focused on is criminal justice reform here in New York City, starting with the Commission on Rikers and understanding and being a strong advocate that it was an inhumane situation there. Can you talk a little bit about either your record on criminal justice or to where we are now that you just referenced, that this breaking point that should be now an opportunity to really take the time to rebuild our society in a fair and just way. And I know we've been sharing a lot of articles with the NOW team that really sheds a lot of light on ways that it can be done and that it has been tried in the past, and to see some of the intentional strategies used by different electeds, including the current occupant of the White House, to further marginalize people,
right,
is staggering. And I hope people take the time to learn that history so that they can be informed and engaged in outrage to keep up this fight. But I would love to know a little bit about your thoughts on this.
So, I mean, yes, my framework and my approach to life, and obviously my approach as an elected official, was about how do we create more equity and more justice? And understanding and coming from a colonial background, right? I am from Puerto Rico, and we are a colony of the United States, and colonization is oppression, and we've lived through our share of history, right, of oppressive tactics that have been implemented against us as a colony. So there's that understanding of oppression, right, and of inequities that are systemic. So for me, it was always about, like, I want to work very intentionally, as you're saying, like, towards creating more equity, more justice. And having been in the city council here in New York City, which is the legislative body for the city of New York, for 12 years, and those last 4 years, I had an opportunity to be the speaker of the New York City Council and lead this legislative body. It was always about, like, how do we use the influence that we have to not only enact laws, but also to how do we shape policies and the impact that it's going to have on our daily lives. So, you know, my first 2 terms here in the city council were under Mayor Bloomberg, where we had a historic number here in the city of New York of stop and frisks. And I know this conversation came up very heavily during the presidential primary as we was running for Congress, that we wanted to make sure that that record was not forgotten, right? Where we had almost, at the height of stop and frisk, 800,000 young Black and brown, predominantly men, who were being arrested, who were being stopped, who were being frisked. There was a lawsuit. So I was very vocal, right, against the administration, against the police commissioner, Kelly at the time, in our budget hearings, very, very forceful, because my community was directly one of the top communities that was being impacted by this. So the idea of how law enforcement and police was overstepping and criminalizing a whole generation of young people, and not only that, also criminalizing our neighborhoods and where we come from. And so the idea was about, you know, what do we do to address that? And so we were able to make changes. Advocates did issue a lawsuit, and that was upheld in court, that practice was unconstitutional. And so there was that demand for reform. So it goes back to then, right? Being speaker I've always been a supporter of decriminalization of marijuana, for instance. We saw a lot of arrests happening, but how do we try to minimize the interaction between our communities and the criminal justice system, understanding that we are over-criminalized? And so the idea of basically recategorizing low-level offenses so that our young men and our young people were not being arrested unnecessarily for low-level nonviolent offenses. When we talk about closing a Rikers and the symbol of that institution, and that symbol of injustice and that symbol of dehumanization, the advocates were very strong, and I embraced that call and basically convened a commission here in the city of New York, an independent commission, that came to that conclusion that yes, Rikers must be closed. We have to think about restorative justice practices. We have to, think about prosecutorial misconduct. These are all things that obviously are coming into the conversation in light of the mobilizations against the murder of George Floyd, and just about law enforcement in general and how it interacts with our communities. So, there's a lot of work that we did here on the ground in New York, and the idea of making change happen that way. So I'm very proud of that record. And one of the other things I was able to do is to negotiate with 4 out of our 5 DAs here in the city of New York to eliminate about 700,000 outstanding warrants. We had about 1.5 million warrants on the books here in New York City. And so we got 700,000 warrants cleared that were basically 10 years or older. Warrants basically means that if you get stopped at any point and you do have a warrant, and in some cases these warrants were 10 years or older, you could get picked up, arrested, and taken to Rikers. So those are big substantive changes. So that experience is what I bring to this fight, that level of understanding about the systemic injustices and how do we unravel it, how do we dismantle dismantle that from within our entities, our agencies, our government agencies in particular, to bring more equality and justice to communities that have been marginalized and oppressed for far too long.
Yes. And, I'm thinking about, the intersection of race and gender.
Oh, yeah.
And that is something that we're thinking a lot about. And you've done work in both of these areas and done it intersectionally as well. And I would love if you could take a minute and talk a little bit about some of the initiatives you started were really groundbreaking, like the Young Women's Initiative, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
And then even the 21 for 21.
21, yes. So look, I'm a firm believer, and I put that into practice as an elected official, that you know, I'm there as an elected official to like really channel the voices, right, of the people that have been impacted by issues, and that they have to be part of the decision-making process as well. I can't lead in a vacuum, right? I cannot lead just trying to force a particular point of view without being informed about the issues and really being grounded in that information and the knowledge that impacted people can provide. So, you know, having been the speaker, there had been a call by a lot of advocates. Girls for Gender Equity took a real lead in this, that when Obama had done My Brother's Keeper, I don't know what that is. So that when we had done, you know, when Obama had done My Brother's Keeper, that there wasn't really anything addressing the needs of young women, and particularly young women of color. And so the advocates here in New York were saying, well, we should create some sort of initiative following that model, because young women in particular face a whole different set, right, of oppressions and of injustices, and that they have needs that need to be tackled. And so we did initiate the Young Women's Initiative, and that was basically a collaboration between government, us, the city council, and philanthropy. And we were able to jointly raise $20 million. We made a commitment to put in $10 million over 2 years as a city council. And philanthropy through the New York Women's Foundation was able to put in $10 million over 2 years, and while raising that. And so we had basically brought young women into the conversation, having conversations across the table from government officials representing different city agencies, the health department, the education department, the recreational department, like all the different agencies, to talk about what their challenges were, right? How do we lower and lessen the barriers that these young women were facing? Our LGBTQ young people, right, as well, and how services were not addressing the needs that they had. So we went through a consultative process with them for about a year and a half, and came with this whole set of recommendations of what government should be doing to address the challenges that they had identified. And so that was an exhaustive process. It was a wonderful process, and it came out with a whole set of recommendations, which the website, I believe, is still active, that people can take a look at. So we made that commitment, and that was coming from me. And I think that obviously being a woman, being a feminist, being a Latina, there was a real commitment, right, to that. And so that idea of how women bring the experiences to the table, and that our perspective needs to be represented, that's why we need to elect more women to office. And I believe in that strongly. And the other one was the 21 and 21, which basically is around the same issue. I mean, as a resident of New York City, a city that claims to be progressive, and a city that obviously the majority are women, it really pains me that we do not have any woman in a citywide position in the city of New York. And we don't have any women in a statewide position in the state of New York. So the 21 and 21 was understanding that we needed to change the reality of women in office here in the city. So at the city council level, which is the local legislative body, when I came into office in 2006, out of the 51 city council members, 18 were women, which is obviously still severely underrepresented, but we were 18 out of 51 members. By the time I became speaker, that number had diminished, you know, and by the time I left office, we went down to 11 out of 51 members of the city council who were women. And so for me, the 21 and 21 initiative resulted out of seeing that trend, that downward trend, and saying, no, we want to encourage, nurture, help train, encourage women to step up and say that they're going to run for city council, for the city council. And so it's really been wonderful. We've seen an incredible number of women step up. The next big cycle here in New York City is 2021, where we elect our citywide officials, and we elect about 40 out of the 51 positions in the city council are up. And so we have a real ability to make substantive change. So the idea there is to get no less than 21 women elected to the city council in 2021.
You know, I think a lot of people don't even realize how low those numbers have been. it really is astounding for our city.
Yes.
It certainly is one of our goals to make that happen. Thanks for putting it so starkly. I mean, it's such a great campaign. And, you know, the Young Women's Initiative, it speaks so directly to what has gone wrong and what needs to happen now. There's a great article in the New York Times by Elizabeth Hinton, who's an expert on criminal justice reform, an author. And, you know, the story is titled George Floyd's Death is a Failure of Generations of Leadership. And it really chronicles, you know, this time during the Johnson administration where there was a whole strategy created on the basis with the foundation that you don't come into communities and tell them what's good for them and then monitor them in some kind of authoritative way. That they have to lead the effort.
Yes.
They have to be part at the table creating the solutions, and you fund that, which is precisely what you just described.
Yes.
And, you know, Elizabeth Hinton says that our society would look very, very different today if they would not have abandoned that plan. But what happened is that plan ended up making a lot of white male electeds nervous at the time. They really didn't want to give up any of the power. They didn't want anybody else to have any decision-making power.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something that we are going to have to watch for now, even with good-intentioned people.
Yep. Yeah, no, and I think that, you know, and let's be clear, right? You know, I was raised in Puerto Rico. My mother was a leader in the feminist movement in Puerto Rico. And I was raised within a movement, right? And raised by other young, strong women that were fighting for that equality for myself, right? And for my generation and those following us. But we know that within the white feminist movement here in this country in the 70s, there was that battle also, right? Between women of color, feeling, right, that their voice and their experiences were not, and we still have that conversation, let's be honest. We haven't completely fully gotten over that, but that still is a battle. But it's always about the voice of the people, you know, people allowing to be heard and to influence our agendas as well, and welcoming that into the space. And so I remember that conversation that you just laid out when I went to the UN conference for women, the one that Hillary Clinton had spoken at. I'm forgetting the year now, back when it was, as I was interacting with women that were doing activist work in other countries, that same framework, like, we are not here to be spoken at, right? And you can't come from the United States and impose, right, on us and tell us where we should be as women, right? Where our progress, how it should be measured, right? We have to develop that ourselves. And so that really is something that I think voices and experiences like what I bring to the table are important. And to remind people that, you know what, you can't speak for me, right? You can't, you can't try to come and tell me what it is that I should be doing or how I should be doing it. And that is something that I really believe in based on my experience, having grown up in Puerto Rico and now living outside of the island, the context of being a colony, right? Of not allowing people to try to force a particular path for us on the island. That has to come through extensive consultation and local decision-making. And so I feel the same way when we're talking about human rights struggles and civil rights struggles, right? That we have to allow the space for communities to define for themselves what that path is. And we be vehicles to facilitate that. That for me is really important as an elected official.
Yes, so very true. And I hadn't even thought about kind of the international perspective and ramifications of that, because there certainly has been with you know, a sense of American exceptionalism and going in. I mean, it is, we have seen it, its effects from you know, terrorism being probably the first one. Can we talk, you know, your race is so fascinating.
Yes, please.
You know, we had a discussion, the team, we were talking about seats that can be flipped here in New York, that's kind of what we're focusing on. We know how important it is to get the right leaders, the progressive leaders in Congress. Hopefully we'll have a new president in November.
Oh, yes.
But that person will need support. And God forbid it's Trump. We have to have fighters in there. We're talking about your seat because it's going to be determined in a matter of weeks in the primary.
Right.
Because all the candidates it's Democratic. But in many ways your seat fits into that flipping because one of your opponents who's has the most name recognition there, who's been in office for a long time, actually is the antithesis of our democratic values in many ways.
Yeah.
And so I say to myself, what's worse, a Republican who I know where they're going to stand and how they're going to vote, and or someone who might see that they're a Democrat and not realize that that this person actually fights hard against some of our very core democratic values, and that is Ruben Diaz Sr.,
Right.
who's your main competitor and who needs to be beat, and I believe you're the person, you're the best choice there and the person who could do it. But he's absolutely anti-choice. I want everybody to know, and it's not a personal opinion, and he's very, very vocal about it. In fact, we would have been able to secure rights for New York women, under the threat of potentially losing Roe v. Wade that has been constantly always hanging over our head for years now. So we were trying to enshrine the Roe v. Wade in New York law because it wasn't protected in New York law.
Right.
And, for years, he really held that up with a few other people. And that's really important to know, that he is fighting against our right and
Yep.
our freedom to comprehensive reproductive health care.
Right.
That it doesn't end there. He vehemently opposed marriage equality. And that was incredibly hurtful and offensive to so many people here in New York. But he held those views proudly.
Yeah.
And then the other thing to top that on is he's just like a good old boy. And that reared its head a year ago when the city council was having sexual harassment training. Now, this was coming on the heels of 2 council people having allegations against them.
Right.
So city council said, let's move into high gear and get some training in. I mean, he literally said, he got up in the room and proudly said, I'll never report my colleague because I'm not a rat. Something to that effect. For him, that's the way he thinks. He is just not, and he's an old guy, I understand that, but he has not progressed at all in his thinking. And that's just such a, it's such a, that complicity in sexual harassment, in sexual assault, is something that we have recognized as just as bad of a problem, and that kind of intrinsic problem that we're not going to be able to fix anything if that continues to exist.
Right.
And he's right at the center of it. So I just really felt it was important to tell people
Yep.
What the real deal is in your district. I don't know if you want to talk about anything else about the makeup of the race.
So I was gonna say, look, and I want to say how much I deeply appreciate NOW's endorsement, and I think it's been hard for people outside, those of you that are watching that live outside of New York City, New York State. People have kind of really not paid too much attention to this race. Why? Because not only is it considered an unfortunate reality, is that it is one of the poorest urban congressional districts in the country, but it is probably the most Democratic district in the country, where the only thing that matters here is the primary, right? We're not going to have a Republican win this race. That's never going to happen. So what matters here is the primary. And so for me, as a Democrat, and not to say that our Democratic Party is perfect, because I believe there's a lot of improvements that I'd like to see it. In terms of what our values are, it is a damn shame that we have a Reverend Ruben Diaz Sr. running in this race. He should withdraw immediately. He does not represent our values. He is anti-choice, as you mentioned. He is anti-LGBTQ equality. He has embraced the Republican Party. He has paraded Republican candidates in this district, Senator Ted Cruz being one of them. He has supported Republican candidates for governor here in the state of New York. He caucused with the Republicans when he was in the state Senate, and to give the state Senate a majority. If you, so this individual is a disgrace and should withdraw immediately. So to me, in this time of Trump, in this time when also the Reverend Diaz has been an apologist for Trump, when Trump has all he has done is incite violence, and I actively believe that. He has had our communities in the crosshairs as a woman of color, as a Puerto Rican woman. Our community has been assaulted on all fronts, and so to have anyone be an apologist for Trump, particularly in this climate, is unacceptable. And so, yes, he is one of the leading contenders because, as you mentioned, he has been in office a long time. He does have a base of support. His son happens to have the same name as his father. His son is a very popular elected official in the Bronx, who does not subscribe to his father's perspectives and point of view. Although at times I don't think he's been vociferous enough in his setting himself apart on some of those views. But, this is a real issue. And so in these last, as of yesterday, 3 weeks before the primary, it really is important to put all hands on deck, and that the most viable candidate in this race to defeat the Reverend and to win the seat is me, Melissa Mark-Viverito, based on 12 years having represented a portion of this congressional district. But the fact that the electorate and the demographic in this district is majority women. The fact that we know that women have an advantage when they're running in open seats where there is no incumbent. And that I did have a citywide platform, right, that got me into the living rooms of all New Yorkers because I was on the news very frequently, right, and negotiating the budgets for the city of New York and going to task and to toe-to-toe with the mayor on different issues, of being the spokesperson for the city council. So there's a familiarity with me, and that I'm fully bilingual. This is a district where the majority of constituents speak a language predominantly, another language other than English, that language being Spanish. And so I'm fully bilingual, bicultural. And so for me, that, puts me as the one who can defeat. And I believe we're going to win this race. So we're working hard. And anybody that can just lend a hand in these last couple of weeks, we will take that assistance. And so, it really is a damn shame, as I said at the beginning. We are living very difficult times. And we don't need anyone who's going to enable this sociopathic dictator who is ripping our country apart. And so Absolutely. This is very dire. It's very serious.
Absolutely. And the website is MMV for the Bronx.
Yes.
So you can check it out to see how you can help directly. Tomorrow evening at 6, you will receive the invite again in the follow-up email here. Really, it's going to be a really fascinating discussion. The mayor of Puerto Rico is going to join Melissa for a Zoom Q&A. So
people should be familiar with the mayor of San Juan, Carmen Yulín Cruz, who really took on Trump after Hurricane Maria, but she obviously is become very familiar to those in the progressive circles. And she was a co-chair of the Bernie Sanders campaign. So if people want to join us, we'd be very welcome to have you hear from her directly. And she has endorsed my campaign and my candidacy. She is running for governor of Puerto Rico. She would be only the second woman to become the governor of Puerto Rico, something that we haven't done here in the state of New York, or we haven't done as a country, but we have had a female governor in Puerto Rico, but she's running for governor. And obviously she needs allies in Congress as well to work with her as she puts forward an agenda for the island. So that's something that I'm sure she'll be speaking to in the conversation tomorrow, amongst other issues as well. So I hope that people that are watching this today could be interested in participating.
Wonderful. We have a time for a few questions from Kathleen. It's kind of an add-on to what you were just talking about. You know, how are you going to rise above this group? There's so many candidates, and what do you think? What do you say is the biggest? Okay, wait. This is from Kay. What do you say is the biggest barrier that women face in your district, and how would you use a position in Congress to reinforce your local initiatives?
Well, I mean, look, we you know, the healthcare system in this country is obviously, and this pandemic has demonstrated that, is not acceptable, right? And all of that, what it entails. You know, access to reproductive health care also is very, very important, something that we should not dismiss. It's obviously the attacks against that under this administration have increased. We've seen the defunding, serious defunding of healthcare services, primarily Planned Parenthood, for instance. So there is a real serious attack. And going back to the main opponent in this race, he's made it very clear in an interview that he did, that he is taking the culture wars to Congress, right? His interest is to make the fight for choice a real issue, right? And being anti-choice, he wants to make an anti-LGBTQ. So, you know, he is actively looking to use that and be promoting that. And I have to tell you, from my experience on the ground and knocking on doors and talking to people who know both me and know of the Reverend, they're not aware, right, of the apologist kind of stance that he's done with Trump. They're not fully aware of his record. And I think that as people become aware of that record, there is a way to peel, and we have seen that we can peel voters away from him. And I'm the best candidate since there's already familiarity with me in the same spaces where there's familiarity with the Reverend, right? So that's important. So the issue for it, to me, I think, is like healthcare access is important. We need preventive care as well, you know, in a district where there's so much disparity. And obviously job creation. I'm also fighting on a platform that we should not have a minimum wage of less than $15 an hour. And we have to clean up our environment because this district has the highest hospitalization rates due to asthma. And that has to do with the environment. And that there's an incredible number of waste transfer stations in this district, right? So the issue of environmental injustice, environmental racism is very real in this district. So for me, those are issues that are really front and center. We have to have access to quality healthcare without barriers for people to thrive. And so that to me is an important issue, and one that I'm fighting for is Medicare for all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, so how about, how will you use your experience in the City Council to enact, this is from Mimi Akhtar, how will you use your experience in the City Council to enact reforms to fight against police brutality and break down systemic racism?
Look, I think the window of opportunity is there. You know, we're already starting to see at local, state levels, city council levels, at least here in New York. You're hearing it also from congressional delegations, a whole host of legislation to address this issue, right, of policing, greater accountability, not adding the demilitarization of our police departments, right? They've been having this unfettered access to like these military weapons, and that has obviously caused a lot of problems. But the issue also is on the greater scale, and I heard a great congressman, a really interesting conversation that he was having, an interview, but then we start looking at policies, we cannot continue to be race neutral. We know that there is inequities that particular communities face, right? That racial injustice is real and it can be measured. So that when we start talking about budgets and in terms of funding, then we have to provide funding in a greater amounts to those communities that have been disproportionately impacted as a way of addressing those systemic injustices. So we can't be race neutral. We have to be able to study. We have to be able to measure that injustice and then address it by greater resource allocation, and being very intentional about it and talking about it very openly, right? So this issue of being anti-racist in this environment and being a true ally is not just saying I'm not racist, it's being an anti-racist, which is to dismantle these structures that have created such injustices and such oppression in communities of color. So to me, that's really important. And that's one of the experiences as a coalition builder here in New York of really tackling challenges like the closing of Rikers, which people thought was never going to happen because I was going up against law enforcement at all levels, between the DAs, between the corrections officers union, between the police unions here. Nobody was in favor. Even the mayor was against it. And so people were like, oh, she's never going to get this done. But we built a coalition, right? We had stakeholders that were at the front and center of that conversation, and we were able to win and be victorious in that battle. So I have that experience of tried and true, right? Of being bold and courageous and for what is right, the causes that are right and just. And that's what I will continue to do in Congress as well.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with someone the other day. They were so proud and happy to say that they were colorblind, and breaking that down for them and explaining that that's actually counterproductive at this point.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Yes.
So this kind of goes a little bit to your about communities and funding them. Divya asks, I know that you have done extensive work promoting the arts and expanding recreational centers in the Bronx. In a time such as this, I feel that the arts are more important than ever, and
Yes.
that we can seek solace in them and use art as vessels to communicate with other people. Do you think there's a way we can use a kind of artistic platform to address current divisions and issues and promote the integrity of New York City as a whole? And
Yes.
I would add, make sure that we don't lose funding for it. It doesn't fall
Right.
into
No,
sixth
look,
wayside.
it has to be seen, you know, as integral to the way to our well-being. You know, I'm not an artist. I mean, one of the things my mother was my mother was a young mother. By the age of 24, she had 3 kids, right? And she was balancing like going to school. She was going for her law degree and all that. She was very, very good about exposing us, right, to art, and encouraged us to go to museums and theater productions. And like that really helps expand your worldview as well, right? Because art is an expression, points of view, perspectives that are being shared, right? And so it's a way of expressing yourself. Now, I'm not an artist, like I'm not a writer, I'm not a painter, but I have a deep appreciation of the arts because I find that as an outlet. And that I love to witness the how people express themselves through art, and it's a healing process too. And so when we talk about taking art out of the classrooms, obviously, you know, those school districts that have wealthier families, they'll raise the money on their own and they'll provide those art classes to the kids. But in areas that are lower income, we see kids that are being stripped, right, of that creativity and the value that brings to them. So I'm a firm believer. Like one of the things that I did support the arts heavily when I was a speaker. We did, the borough of the Bronx was the only borough in the city of New York that did not have a children's museum. And so there was that idea of creating a children's museum, and we put money behind it, and we're able to give that life to the point now where we are gonna have a children's museum in the Bronx. I'm very proud of having been a strong supporter of that effort. So yes, I unfortunately, it's the things that get cut, but that's why I'm saying, and this is not something that's gonna happen overnight, but we have to demand that we have to envision what our priorities are in this country and what is it that we value. And so, and that money has to follow that, right? The fact that we see a Bezos who I refuse to use Amazon, let me be clear, I don't even, the fact that he is making billions of dollars in a pandemic and that corporation does not pay taxes in this country is a disgrace. And that there are others like him who are actually making money in this pandemic, and that there's this fear, right, particularly from our governor here in the state of New York, of taxing the wealthier just a little bit more in order to not have cuts happening to our educational system, not having cuts to CUNY or higher educational public system. You know, that to me is again, demonstration of the lack of will from our elected officials that we have to change. And so, I believe in supporting the arts. I do not think that we should be cutting that. And so that's part of the conversation.
Okay, wow, there's some great additional questions, but I don't think I can, unless you can like literally the 15-second response if you have it, because I've got a few of them about having hard conversations with people about the protests. This one is, what do you think is the most important issues and talking points to help get us through to undecided voters or people who aren't inclined to go to vote? But
so
a quick answer if you can.
Yeah, this is a very low voter turnout district, unfortunately. And I tell people, I said, people not voting is not apathy. People not voting is a conscious decision, right? They're not voting because they don't feel that the candidates or the elected officials are speaking to them. So my interest is to be a very engaged elected official once I get elected, to really try to change and get people inspired and more civically engaged so that we can get them more active at the voting booths. But unfortunately, this district is a low turnout district, and I'm hoping that once I get elected, we can change that reality.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for taking your precious time, Melissa. For everybody, again, you'll get the information. Join the conversation tomorrow night with Carmen Yulín Cruz, the mayor of San Juan. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Look forward to getting on the phone and dialing for you.
Oh, wonderful. Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And I'm going to turn it over now to Jean Bucaria.
Hi, everyone. I hope you could see me. So I'm really grateful. Thank you to Melissa for joining us today to have some of these important discussions, and thanks to all of you for tuning in today, especially at this moment where I think that we're all facing just a tremendous amount of pain and heartbreak at the police brutality that we saw in Minneapolis, but also that, you know, many of us have been fighting against for many years. And I think that, you know, in order for us to really honor George Floyd's memory and for us to make change, that we do need to stay focused on the actions that each one of us could take. Some people are going out in the streets. We are in the midst of a pandemic, so people are making tough decisions about their own safety and lives and what they can and can't do. But there are ways that every individual can really contribute to making change. And as Melissa said, you know, dismantling racism, it starts with each one of us in our own lives, whether that's finding ways to be a strong ally or finding ways to take action or lift up voices that need to be heard. So that's what we're here to do. And I just want to mention, I don't know if the action slide can be shared, but there are a few actions that that I'm hoping that you'll take after today's call. As Melissa pointed out, you know, we think, oh, in voting in New York, we're a blue state, but, you know, the local leadership matters so much. Who we elect, if they stand for our values, that's going to make a big difference. And especially, we're seeing this, the catastrophic result of having a president that is racist, that won't speak out against white supremacy, who doesn't believe science and can't handle what needs to be handled in this time of COVID. And it's led to needless death, whether that's been, you know, children immigrants or people that have died from COVID unnecessarily because we didn't act quickly enough. That all of these things are impacted by our local leaders. So that's why whether you're in New York or you're in a swing state, getting out to vote is vital. So make sure that you do get your absentee ballot. Absentee ballots application should be sent to everyone in the mail, but you do have to respond to that to get a mail-in ballot, or you can actually still go out to the polls on June 23rd. But the last day to get the absentee ballot application, your absentee ballot in, it has to be postmarked by the day before the election, June 22nd. So everything you need to know about voting, because we're running out of time on this call, even though there's so much to talk about, We will make sure that everyone that's on the call will get an email with all the information and links that you need to make sure that you're ready to vote. Because I think the next thing is to make sure that the people in your lives across the country, in Arizona, Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Wisconsin, in the swing states, are also ready to vote in the election in November. And that's something that we're going to be building toward. So if you've signed our Grab Trump by the Ballot pledge, we're going to be in touch with you on actions you could take to help register voters across the country. Another important thing that I think we're all feeling today is that we need to voice voice our support to fight against police brutality and make changes here, whether that's in New York City or wherever you are. There are calls for policy reforms that we can get behind. One of those here in the city is to just simply end the chokehold as a practice, as a police practice. It's kind of unbelievable at this point that this has not been changed. When this was first brought up in 2014 after Eric Garner's death. So I think that our elected leaders need to hear from us. So whether that's your city council person, you can call them and let them know that you are 100% in support of reforms that are going to end these brutal practices that have resulted in the murder of unarmed Black men. And also there's been other practices that have harmed others across the country. So I think we need to take action. Call your local leaders. They need to hear from you. There's also a call at the state level, if you're one of our state members and not here in the city, to repeal a civil rights law 50A, which would make sure that there is public disclosure of police misconduct records. As we saw in the case of George Floyd, that officer had over 18 complaints against him. And we also see there's intersections here between the police brutality that we see against people of color across the country, and also against sexual assault victims and how they're treated by the police. And that's an issue that we've been working on. So there's a lot of reform that needs to happen, and we all have to continue to push for that. So find out where you can call your local leaders, whether that's here in New York City or across the state or in your local communities, to really let them know that you are calling for these changes. And the last thing, as you heard from Melissa and from some of the comments I've already made, phone banking is critical right now. I mean, we cannot go door to door. We cannot use our face-to-face tactics of campaigning. And so we have, in addition to Melissa Mark-Viverito's run, which is really important, as you heard, she's running against an anti-choice, homophobic Democrat. There are other races in our state where we have the opportunity to flip seats and turn them blue, and where those people can finally have the representation that they need. So we ask that you sign up for a training for phone banking. What's great about this is that once you sign up and you do the training, you can then make calls from home. You can get friends to virtually make calls at the same time you're doing calls. We're going to hold some virtual phone banks together, but we need you to first sign up with us, and then you'll get all the information you need to connect into the trainings that fit your schedule. But we have trainings listed starting tomorrow through Monday. So I think it'd be great if you could pick one of those and get started, and then we will be in touch on further actions we can take. So again, thank you for taking action with us. And I'm going to turn it over to Shannon to close out the meeting today, if that works.
Thanks, Jean. Okay, so we have one last ask of everyone. We'll be posting in the next few seconds a link to our feedback survey, and we'd love if you could just take the next minute to complete that. It won't take you long at all. We'd love to know what you thought, and we would love to know if you have suggestions for any future webinars. What do you want to see? We would really like to know. So if you just, we'll get that into the chat room in a sec. And we really appreciate your feedback. So I'll just give you all a minute. Okay, there we go. Thanks, Jean. You'll also get the survey link in the follow-up email as well. But if you have a second to do that now, we would love that. We hope to see you next week. We'll be having a conversation with Celinda Lake, who is a pollster and political strategist. So that promises to be a really interesting conversation. Same time and place, Wednesday, 12 noon. You'll be getting an email about that shortly with the RSVP link. If you haven't signed up for our emails, then please visit our website, NOW-endorsed.org, and you can be added to the mailing list to ensure you stay up to date on this webinar series and the other work that NOW is doing. And please feel free to share it within your networks as well. The more the merrier. All right, until next week, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you then. Take care.